I found a secret letter from my husband. It changed everything. I wasn't snooping. Let's get that straight. It was a regular Tuesday evening when I found the letter. I was putting away laundry in our bedroom when I noticed one of Daniel's old jackets crumpled at the back of the closet. I picked it up, gave it a shake, and something fluttered to the floor. An envelope. Yellowed at the edges, as if it had been tucked away for years. Curious, I opened it. The moment I saw my husband's handwriting, my stomach twisted. "My love," it began. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the letter. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who wrote love letters. He was thoughtful, yes, but practical. So why did he write this? And why was it hidden? I took a breath and continued reading. "I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give this to you, but I need to say it somewhere. I love you more than I ever thought possible. But I've been keeping a secret that I fear will break us." I gripped the letter tighter. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the rest of the page. There's someone else. The room blurred. I sat down on the edge of the bed, forcing myself to keep reading. "Not in the way you think. It was before you. A long time ago. I made a mistake and I have a son. I never told you. I wanted to, but the years passed and every time I looked into your eyes, I was terrified of losing you." A son? I pressed my hand to my mouth. Daniel and I had been married for 10 years. We had no children, not for lack of trying. He doesn't know about me. His mother wanted it that way. But I think about him every day. And I wonder, does he ever wonder about me? I don't know if I'll ever tell you, but if you find this, please know that I never meant to lie. I only wanted to protect what we have. The letter ended there, unfinished. No signature, no date. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. A son. All these years, and Daniel had never said a word. I thought back to every conversation we'd had about children, every moment he'd comforted me when we failed to conceive. Had he been carrying this guilt all along? The front door creaked open. "Lena?" Daniel's voice echoed down the hall. "You home?" I folded the letter quickly, shoving it back into the envelope. My heart hammered as he stepped into the bedroom, his warm brown eyes meeting mine. He smiled. "Hey, everything okay?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because nothing was okay. Everything had changed. I swallowed hard, the letter burning in my hands like a secret I shouldn't have uncovered. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." Daniel leaned against the doorway, watching me with quiet curiosity. "About what?" I hesitated. I could confront him right now. Lay the letter on the bed and demand the truth. But something inside me wavered. I didn't just want the facts, I wanted to understand why. So I slipped the letter beneath the pile of folded clothes on the bed and stood. "Nothing important," I lied. "How was work?" He shrugged. "Same as usual. You hungry? I was thinking of ordering in." I nodded, though food was the last thing on my mind. "Sounds good." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Daniel laughed at a joke on TV, but I barely heard it. He reached for my hand while we sat on the couch, but I felt stiff, unnatural. I was drowning in questions. Who was she? The woman he'd had a child with. Did he ever check in on his son, even from a distance? And most of all, had he ever planned to tell me? That night I barely slept. Daniel, oblivious, held me close as usual, his breath warm against my neck. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going to find out the truth. On my own. After Daniel left for work, I went straight for the letter. There was no date, no name, no clear clue to go on. But I knew one thing. If this child existed, there had to be a record somewhere. I started small. Our filing cabinet, old tax documents, anything that might hint at child support or a past relationship. Nothing. Frustrated, I turned to the one place secrets rarely stayed hidden: the internet. An hour of searching Daniel's name alongside keywords like son, paternity, and family led nowhere. But then on a whim, I typed, and that's when I found it. An old newspaper archive, a birth announcement from 12 years ago. The mother's name was Emily Carter. The father's name wasn't listed, but my gut told me this was it. I clicked on Emily Carter's name, hoping for more. Social media profiles, maybe even a photo. And there it was, a Facebook account. A profile picture of a woman with warm brown eyes, and next to her, a boy. My breath caught. He looked like Daniel. The same sharp jawline, the same dimple on one side when he smiled. I scrolled further. Birthday posts, pictures of them at the park, a comment from a friend. He's growing up so fast, Em. Can't believe he's already 12. 12. So Daniel had been keeping this secret from me for over a decade. My hands shook as I clicked on her profile, my mind spinning. I could message her. I could demand answers. Or I could go straight to Daniel. That evening, as soon as Daniel walked through the door, I was ready. The letter sat on the kitchen table. My laptop, open to Emily's profile, waited next to it. Daniel froze the moment he saw my expression. Lena, what's wrong? I inhaled sharply. I found your letter. His face went pale. His eyes darted to the table where the envelope sat like a bomb waiting to explode. Lena. His voice was barely a whisper. Tell me everything. For a moment, he just stood there, his hands clenching and unclenching. Then, finally, he exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. I should have told you, he said quietly. A long time ago. Yeah, I snapped. You should have. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Regret? Sorrow? Maybe even relief. I didn't know how, he admitted. I was young. Emily and our relationship ended before I even knew she was pregnant. She told me later, but she made it clear she didn't want me involved. And at first, I thought maybe it was better that way. My heart clenched. And now? A pause. Then, softly, I think about him all the time. Silence stretched between us. The weight of 10 years of secrets sat heavy in the air. So what now? I asked, my voice quieter now. Daniel met my gaze. That's up to you. I studied him, the man I had loved for a decade, the man who had lied to me, but also the man standing here now, raw and open and waiting. This secret had changed everything. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to break everything. I let Daniel's words settle in the air between us. That's up to you. He was giving me control of the next move, but all I felt was uncertainty. Could I forgive him? Could I accept that, for 12 years, he had a son out there, a son he never told me about? I sat down, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. Did you ever want to reach out to him? Daniel hesitated. I did, 100 times. His voice cracked. But Emily was firm. She didn't want me in his life. And when we got married, I told myself it didn't matter, that it was better for everyone if I let it go. I shook my head. But it does matter, Daniel. He's your son. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it. The years of guilt, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. I know, he whispered. And I don't know if I can live with staying away anymore. My breath caught. What are you saying? He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I want to meet him, Lena. I want to be in his life, if he'll let me. I stared at him, my heart pounding. I had prepared for anger, for hurt, for betrayal. But I hadn't prepared for this, the moment where he chose to face the past instead of running from it. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I could handle it. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be the kind of wife who stood by her husband through anything. But there was a selfish, ugly part of me that resented it. I thought about every time we had cried over negative pregnancy tests. Every time Daniel had held me and told me it would be okay. And the entire time he already had a child. One morning, I sat on the couch, staring at Emily's Facebook page again. My cursor hovered over the message button. What would I even say? Hi, I'm Daniel's wife, the one he kept in the dark about your son. Before I could decide, Daniel walked in. He paused when he saw my laptop. You're looking at her profile, he said quietly. I shut the laptop, guilt washing over me. Yeah, he sat beside me. Are you mad? I sighed. I don't know what I am, Daniel. I just don't know where this leaves us. He took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. I don't either, but I want to figure it out. With you. For the first time since finding the letter, I let myself soften. Maybe this wasn't just his journey. Maybe it was ours. That evening, we made the decision together. Daniel would send Emily a message. Nothing aggressive, nothing demanding. Just a simple, I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'd like to see him. Even if it's just once. Please let me know if you'd be open to talking, if you'd be open. We sat in silence after he hit send, both of us staring at the screen. Minutes passed, then an hour, and then a reply. My breath hitched as Daniel opened the message. Daniel, I never thought I'd hear from you after all this time. I don't know what to say. He's happy. He has a good life. But if you really want to meet him, we should talk first. A lump formed in my throat. This was real. Daniel was about to meet his son, and I had no idea what that meant for us. Daniel stared at the message for a long time, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held his breath as if afraid to let himself hope. If you really want to meet him, we should talk first. I placed my hand over his. Are you okay? He swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, I never thought this moment would come. Then reply. He exhaled sharply, then typed. I'd really like to talk. Let me know when you're free. We sat there in silence, waiting, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. It was out of our hands now. That night, Daniel barely spoke. He was lost in thought, replaying years of regret in his mind. And I wasn't sure where I fit into any of this. 2 days later, Emily replied, I can meet tomorrow. Just me, not him. I need to know what you really want before I let you into his life. That made sense. If I were her, I'd want answers too. Daniel agreed, and just like that, the meeting was set. The next afternoon, I sat by the window, my stomach in knots as I watched Daniel leave for the cafe where they had agreed to meet. I didn't ask to go with him. This was something he needed to do alone. An hour passed, then 2. When he finally came home, I jumped to my feet. How did it go? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking both exhausted and overwhelmed. She was guarded. I don't blame her. But she listened. She told me about him. His name is Oliver. He likes soccer. He's smart, funny. I smiled faintly. Sounds like you. His expression softened. She said she'll think about it, about letting me meet him. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. Then Daniel stepped closer, his voice quieter. She also asked about you. My breath caught. Me? She wanted to know if you were okay with this. He hesitated. I told her the truth. I don't know. I looked away, my emotions tangled. I don't know either. And that was the hard part, because no matter how much I loved Daniel, no matter how much I wanted to support him, this wasn't just his life that was changing. It was ours. A week passed before Emily responded again. Okay, let's set up a meeting. Daniel was nervous. He spent hours thinking about what he'd say, what he'd do. And me? I spent hours wondering if I was ready for this. The meeting was at a park. Simple, neutral, safe. When we arrived, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench with Oliver. My breath hitched as I saw him. Really saw him. He had Daniel's eyes. Daniel hesitated, as if frozen in place. Then Oliver looked up and saw him. "Hey," Emily said gently. "This is Daniel, the man I told you about." Oliver studied him for a long moment, then frowned. "You're my dad?" Daniel's breath shuddered. "Yeah, buddy, I am." Silence. Then, "Okay?" Just okay. No anger, no tears. Just quiet acceptance from a boy who didn't know how to feel yet. And as I watched them, I realized something. Maybe I didn't know how to feel either. But I did know one thing. This was only the beginning. Oliver's okay lingered in the air between us. Simple yet heavy with meaning. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his eyes filled with cautious hope. Emily patted the bench beside her, and Daniel hesitated before sitting down. I stayed back, watching, feeling like an outsider in a moment that wasn't mine to step into. Oliver studied Daniel with quiet curiosity. "So, what do dads do?" Daniel blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. He let out a small chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, dads do a lot of things. They play soccer with their kids, help with homework, tell really bad jokes." Oliver smirked. "Like what?" Daniel thought for a second, then grinned. "Okay, why don't skeletons fight each other?" Oliver shrugged. "Why?" "Because they don't have the guts." For a second, there was silence. Then Oliver groaned, shaking his head. "That's so bad." But his lips twitched into a smile. Daniel laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. Emily watched the exchange, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. After a while, she said, "Why don't we take a walk? Give you two some time to talk." I stiffened. Was she including me in that? But then she turned to me. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" I hesitated, then nodded. I wasn't sure if this was an invitation to talk or just an excuse to step away. But either way, I followed her toward a small cafe near the park. We sat in silence at first, our coffees untouched between us. Finally, Emily sighed. "This is weird, right?" I let out a small laugh, surprised by her honesty. "Yeah, really weird." She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. I never planned on Daniel being part of Oliver's life. Not because I hated him or anything, but because I thought it would be easier. He wasn't there from the start, and I didn't want to confuse my son. I nodded slowly. "I get that." She looked up at me, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "But I also never thought he'd try." I swallowed. "He's trying now." Emily studied me for a long moment, then asked, "And what about you? Where do you stand in all this?" I opened my mouth, then shut it. Where did I stand? I wanted to support Daniel. I wanted him to have a relationship with his son. But deep down, there was a part of me that felt left out. I had spent years aching for a child. And now, Daniel had one. Not with me, but still his. It was hard not to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. Finally, I sighed. "I don't know yet." Emily nodded, as if she understood. "That's fair." We sat there for a while, sipping our coffee, two women connected by one man, trying to navigate something neither of us had been prepared for. When we returned to the park, Daniel and Oliver were sitting in the grass, kicking a soccer ball between them. I stopped a few feet away, watching. Daniel looked happy. Genuinely happy. And Oliver, he wasn't laughing yet, but he wasn't pulling away either. It was a start. Daniel caught my eye and smiled. It was a silent question. "Are we okay?" I took a deep breath and nodded. Maybe I wasn't ready to fully embrace this yet. Maybe there was still a long road ahead. But as I watched my husband and his son together, I realized something important. This wasn't just his journey. It was ours. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. The drive home was quiet. Not the awkward kind of silence, but a reflective one. Daniel's hands gripped the wheel, his mind clearly elsewhere, probably replaying every second of his first real conversation with Oliver. I glanced at him, searching for the right words. "How do you feel?" He exhaled, shaking his head with a soft chuckle. Like I just met the most important person in my life, and I don't even know him yet. My heart ached at the rawness in his voice. I reached across the console and squeezed his hand. "You will." His fingers tightened around mine, but he didn't speak. Maybe he was afraid to hope too much. When we got home, I curled up on the couch, replaying the day in my head. A part of me still felt like I was standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, unsure if I'd ever truly belong in this new reality. Then Daniel sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "I know this is a lot, Lena." His voice was quiet. "But I don't want to do this without you." I swallowed. What if I don't know how to be part of it? He turned toward me, his expression soft. "Then we figure it out together." For the first time since finding that letter, I let myself believe him. The next morning, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen and froze. Emily Carter. "Hey, Oliver wants to see you again. Would you be free this weekend?" I stared at the message, my heart skipping a beat. That was fast. Daniel came out of the bathroom, rubbing a towel over his damp hair. "What's up?" I wordlessly handed him the phone. His brows lifted as he read the message. Then a slow, stunned smile spread across his face. "He wants to see me again?" I nodded. "Looks like it." Daniel sat on the bed, running a hand over his face. I thought it would take longer. I thought he'd need more time. "He probably does," I said gently. "But he's curious. That's a good thing." Daniel exhaled, then typed back, "I'd love to." "What time works?" A response came almost immediately. 11 a.m., same park. Daniel grinned at me, excitement flickering in his eyes. But then his expression sobered. "Would you come with me?" I hesitated. Last time I had felt like an outsider, like I was witnessing something I had no claim to. But Daniel wanted me there. Needed me there. I nodded. "Yeah, I'll come." That Saturday, we arrived at the park a little early. Daniel was nervous. His hands kept fidgeting, his foot tapping anxiously. Then we saw them. Emily stood a few feet away, talking to another mom, while Oliver approached us hesitantly. "Hey, Oliver," Daniel greeted, his voice warm but unsure. "Hey," Oliver replied. He kicked at the dirt for a moment before looking up. "I brought my soccer ball. Want to play?" Daniel's face lit up with relief. "Yeah, I'd love to." I started to step back, giving them space, but Oliver's gaze flickered to me. His gaze flickered. "Are you playing too?" he asked. I blinked, caught off guard. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent, letting me decide. I hesitated for only a second before smiling. "Sure, but fair warning, I'm terrible at soccer." Oliver grinned. "That's okay. So is he." He pointed at Daniel. Daniel gasped dramatically. "Hey, I'll have you know I was almost picked for my middle school soccer team." Oliver giggled. "Almost?" And just like that, the tension melted. We kicked the ball around for a while, laughing, playing, getting to know each other in the simplest way possible. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized something. This wasn't just Daniel's family now. It was mine too. As we left the park, Oliver ran ahead to catch up with Emily, but before he did, he turned back. "Are you coming next time too?" he asked, looking at me. My breath caught. I looked at Daniel, then back at Oliver and smiled. "If you want me to." He nodded, grinning. "Yeah, you're kind of fun." And with that, he ran off. Daniel turned to me, his expression full of something I couldn't quite name. Love, gratitude, maybe even hope. "Thank you," he murmured. I slipped my hand into his. We're in this together, right? He squeezed my fingers. Always. I didn't know exactly where this road would lead us. There would be challenges, awkward moments, and emotions I wasn't fully prepared for. But as I walked beside my husband, the man I loved, and the boy who might one day feel like a son, I realized one thing. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning. The following weeks felt like stepping into unknown territory. Oliver wanted to see Daniel again, and to my surprise, he wanted me there too. Each meeting, each conversation, chipped away at the initial awkwardness. But for all the progress, I still felt a quiet fear in the back of my mind. Would I ever truly belong in this dynamic? Or was I just a supporting character in a story that wasn't mine to begin with? One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen, a hesitant smile on his face. Emily just texted, he said. She wants to know if we'd like to have dinner with them next weekend. I blinked. Like, at their house? Yeah. He scratched the back of his neck. She thinks it'd be good for Oliver to see us all in a more normal setting. I hesitated. Sitting across from the woman Daniel had once loved, in a house where she had raised his child, it felt daunting. But Daniel's eyes were pleading, so I nodded. Okay, let's do it. When we arrived at Emily's house, I felt like I was stepping into an alternate version of reality. The place was warm and inviting, decorated with personal touches, framed pictures of Oliver, stacks of books, a shoe rack overflowing with tiny sneakers. It was a home. I suddenly felt like an intruder. Emily, however, was gracious. Come in, dinner's almost ready. Oliver ran up to Daniel with an excited grin. I saved a seat for you. Then, after a pause, he looked at me. And you too. Something inside me softened. Dinner itself was surprisingly normal. Conversation flowed. Oliver chatted about school, his favorite video game, how he'd been trying to teach Emily how to do a bicycle kick, and failing. At one point, Emily glanced at me. Oliver talks about you, you know. I froze. He does? She nodded. He likes you. I swallowed. I like him too. Emily studied me for a moment before giving a small smile. Good. And just like that, some of the tension in my chest eased. After dinner, as Daniel and Oliver played a board game in the living room, Emily and I stood in the kitchen, clearing the table. She leaned against the counter, watching me. So, how are you really feeling about all this? I let out a small, tired laugh. Honestly, I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm finding my place. Other days I feel like I'm standing on the outside, looking in. Emily nodded, as if she understood. I won't lie. It's been strange for me too. But I see the way Oliver looks at Daniel. And at you. I met her gaze, unsure where she was going with this. You're becoming part of his world, she said softly. And whether you realize it or not, he's letting you in. I glanced over at Oliver and Daniel, laughing as they argued over the game pieces. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. A few weeks later, Daniel and I took Oliver to a soccer game. It was the first time it was just the three of us. No Emily, no safety net. As we sat in the stands, cheering for his team, Oliver turned to me suddenly. Lena, can you hold my jacket? It was such a simple request, but it caught me off guard. Not Daniel. Not Dad. Mr. I smiled and took the jacket. Of course. And in that tiny, ordinary moment, I realized something. I might never be Oliver's mother in the traditional sense, but I was becoming someone important to him, someone he trusted, someone he chose to include. And maybe that was enough. Months passed, and slowly we found our rhythm. Oliver spent more time with us. We celebrated his birthday together. We navigated the awkward moments, the tough conversations, the unexpected joys. One night, after tucking Oliver into bed at our house for the first time, Daniel turned to me, his eyes filled with quiet emotion. You okay? He asked. I smiled. feeling something warm and certain settle in my heart. Yeah, I whispered. I think I finally am. And for the first time since finding that letter, I knew. This wasn't just Daniel's story. It was ours. Things were finally falling into place. Oliver was warming up to Daniel, and even I had started to feel like I belonged in this new reality. Emily and I had developed a cautious but growing respect for one another. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. Until the night everything shattered. It was late, just past midnight, when Daniel's phone rang. He was in the shower, so I instinctively reached for it. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. Hello? There was silence on the other end. A faint, shaky breath. Then a voice. Low, hesitant, and terrifyingly familiar. Is this Lena? I stiffened. Who is this? A pause. Then, it's Emily. A chill ran down my spine. Emily? What's wrong? I asked, already standing up. Another silence, but this time I could hear her breathing pick up, uneven and sharp. She was crying. Lena, I need to tell you something. About Daniel. The next words out of Emily's mouth sent a shockwave through me. Daniel knew about Oliver before you found the letter. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What? He's known for years, Lena, she whispered. He just never told you. I sank into the couch, my fingers trembling. That's not possible. He was shocked when he found out. I saw it in his face. Because he lied. Emily interrupted, her voice breaking. He and I talked when Oliver was a baby. I told him, I gave him a choice, and he walked away. The air in my lungs vanished. He told me he couldn't risk losing you, Emily continued. That you wanted a child so badly, and he was afraid that knowing he already had one would destroy you. So he buried it. He acted like Oliver didn't exist. Until you found the letter. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding violently. No, you're lying. I swear on my life, Lena, she whispered. He chose to keep this from you. He only came back because you forced his hand. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The sound of the shower stopped. Footsteps approached. Daniel. I turned, still gripping the phone, my eyes locked onto him as he stepped out of the bathroom, towel draped around his shoulders. He smiled at me, completely unaware that in the span of 5 minutes, my entire world had unraveled. Lena? His brows furrowed. What's wrong? I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs, Emily's words echoing in my mind. He's known for years. He walked away. He only came back because you forced his hand. I stood up, my legs shaking. How long have you known? His face paled. What? I swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. How long have you known about Oliver? Panic flickered in his eyes. His mouth opened, then closed. A second too long. A hesitation too deep. And that was all the answer I needed. I took a step back, my chest heaving. You lied to me. Lena, wait. You lied to me for years, Daniel. My voice cracked, fury and betrayal colliding in my throat. You looked me in the eye. Let me grieve thinking we had no children, while all along you chose to abandon the one you had. He reached for me, but I jerked away. I can explain, he pleaded, desperation in his voice. I was scared. I was afraid I'd lose you. You already did. The words came out cold, final. Daniel flinched as if I'd struck him. I turned and grabbed my coat. I didn't even know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not with him. Emily's voice was still in my ear. Lena, I'm so sorry. But I barely heard her, because I had lost something tonight that I could never get back. And this time, there was no fixing it.